They told her to wait at the diner off exit 14. That it would only take 15 minutes to pick up the lift tickets. Order whatever you like, Aunt May. You've earned it, her sister Linda said with that hurried tone, the one she always used when her hands were full and her heart wasn't. May Ellington smiled and nodded like she always had, ever since the kids were little, and she was the quiet fixture at family holidays, the one who made the gravy just right and knew which kid was allergic to strawberries. She sat by the window, watched their SUV pull away, and tucked her napkin into her lap. 15 minutes turned into 45. Then an hour. Then 3. The waitress, a girl with tired eyes and a kind voice, refilled her coffee and asked gently if May was waiting on someone. May forced a smile and said yes. She didn't say it aloud, but something inside her already knew. Knew what the silence meant. Knew what the absence screamed. By hour 6, she had stopped checking the door. The coffee had gone cold, and her legs were stiff from sitting. The sun was starting to dip behind the gas station across the road, when the waitress, whose name tag read Kelsey, came by with a check, still unpaid. She crouched a little and asked, "Ma'am, are you all right? Is someone coming for you?" And that's when it hit. Not like a storm, but like a slow unraveling. May looked up, her voice steady, and said, "No, I don't think they are." Later, in the soft hum of the bus station 2 towns over, she sat on a hard plastic bench with a ticket to Santa Fe tucked into her wallet. The city wasn't new to her. She had spent a summer there in her 20s, before life became a long string of obligations and being the helpful aunt. Now, it felt like a circle trying to close itself. No one called. Her phone, resting silent in her coat pocket, felt heavier than her bag. She didn't turn it off. She just let it be, like a wound that hadn't scabbed over yet. She didn't cry. There's a strange kind of strength in quiet people. In the elderly who have survived the sharp edges of youth and the quiet disappointments of middle age, who have buried friends and watched the world change too fast and too much. Elderly wisdom isn't loud. It's not the kind you put on a quote and frame. It's the kind that lets you sit in a diner for 6 hours and still thank the waitress when you leave. The kind that keeps you upright, even when your heart is falling sideways. At 9:45 p.m., the bus pulled in. May climbed aboard with no ceremony, just one small suitcase and a heart full of fragments. The ride was long, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she looked out the window as towns passed like ghosts and memories rose like fog. The last time someone left her waiting, it was for a different reason, a man who promised to call and never did. She'd forgotten his name, but not the ache. And now, at 74, that ache had returned in a different form. This time, it had her sister's voice and her niece Jenna's nervous glance as they rushed out of the diner. When they left her there, it wasn't just an oversight. It was a decision. And May, for the first time in decades, decided to make one of her own. She arrived in Santa Fe just after dawn. The air was sharp and smelled faintly of cedar and dust. She remembered this air. It had once filled her lungs when she danced barefoot on red dirt, when she believed in poetry and possibility. Now she believed in starting over. A motel on the edge of town had a vacancy sign glowing dimly in the morning light. The clerk didn't ask questions. May paid for 3 nights in cash and took the key to room 6. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old fabric, but it was hers, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to ask permission.
She slept most of that day.
The kind of sleep that only comes after you've been emotionally hollowed out. And when she woke, she didn't feel sad. She felt unburdened. There's a kind of healing that begins not when someone apologizes, but when you stop waiting for them to. May didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but she knew it wouldn't be the same as yesterday. And that was enough. She made herself tea from the motel's tiny coffee machine. She pulled her old leather journal from her bag, the one she hadn't opened in years, and wrote 3 words on the first page. I am here. Not waiting. Not forgotten. Just here. Somewhere between grief and renewal, something had shifted. The next morning, May woke early, not because she had to, but because her body had been doing so for decades. Her knees creaked when she stood, and her right hip hummed a dull tune, but nothing sharp. Just the quiet chorus of age. She made coffee again, this time stronger, and stood by the narrow motel window looking out at the rising sun bleeding across the stucco walls and telephone lines. There was a small bakery across the street, its glass case already filling with cinnamon rolls and scones. The bell above the door jingled every time someone walked in, construction workers, nurses in scrubs, mothers balancing strollers and caffeine. May wrapped her coat tight around her and crossed the street. The girl behind the counter, younger than her youngest student ever was, smiled in a way that felt real. Not because it was polite, but because she meant it. May ordered a blueberry scone and sat near the window. She took out her journal and began to write. Not about her family, not yet. She wrote about the shape of the scone, the tilt of the sun, the music playing faintly from the kitchen. She wrote because words had always been hers, even when her life had been swallowed up by someone else's needs. Later that afternoon, with no destination in mind, she walked. Past closed galleries and open-air markets, past terracotta homes and wind chimes whispering in the breeze. Then she saw it, a flower shop tucked into the corner of a quiet street. Its window was old and slightly foggy, but inside, the flowers danced like they didn't know what decade it was. May stepped in. A bell rang. The scent hit her like memory, lavender, damp soil, a hint of honeysuckle. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, hair clipped back in a messy bun, arms freckled and strong. "You look like someone who misses wildflowers," the woman said without preamble. May smiled. "Is it that obvious?" You walked in like a person looking for something that smells better than what she's been through. There it was. The first laugh in days, low, surprised, warm. "I'm Ruth," the woman added, holding out her hand. "This shop's been mine for 23 years. What's her name?" "May." "Like the month?" "Exactly." "Well, May, welcome. Everything in here's overpriced, but arranged with love." May walked slowly around the store, touching petals, letting the names fall softly in her mind. Ranunculus, snapdragon, lily, daisy. She hadn't allowed herself this kind of slowness in years. "You just visiting?" Ruth asked. "Not sure yet. Running from something? Maybe. But also running to." Ruth nodded like she understood. That's the better direction. They didn't talk much more that day. But before May left, Ruth handed her a small bundle of marigolds. "On the house," she said. "For the part of you that remembered how to bloom." May carried those marigolds back to her motel room like a flag. That night, she wrote for 2 straight hours. She wrote about the flower shop and the bakery, about Kelsey, the waitress who had checked on her 5 times in one night, about how grief doesn't always show up in black clothes. Sometimes it's hiding behind a napkin, waiting for someone to come back who never will. She wrote until her hand cramped and her tea went cold. Then she wrote a line that made her pause. "They didn't leave me to hurt me. They left me because they didn't see me anymore." There was no anger in that line, just truth, and the beginning of emotional growth. The next morning, Ruth offered her a part-time gig, organizing flower deliveries and trimming stems. "You've got steady hands," she said, "and a kind face. That's more than half the job." May took it, not because she needed the money, though it helped, but because she wanted to touch something living, something that bloomed, even when it had been cut. Working there gave her structure, a reason to get up, to put on real shoes, to speak kindly to strangers who came in looking for tulips or forgiveness. She learned the stories of the customers, the man who bought a single rose every Friday for his late wife's memory, the woman who sent lilies to herself every payday as a reminder that she mattered. It was all part of something bigger, a quiet world that still made room for older women who remembered how to listen. And in the midst of all this, she met Tobias. He came in one Tuesday morning looking for zinnias. "Something bright," he said. "For my porch. I think I've earned some color." Ruth was out on a delivery run, so May helped him. He was tall, silver-haired, with eyes like rain clouds, not cold, just heavy. She asked if he liked reds or oranges better. He said he hadn't liked anything in a while but was willing to try again. That was how it started. They didn't talk much. But he started coming every week.
Sometimes he bought plants.
Sometimes just a single stem. Sometimes he just stood quietly and breathed in the scent of the shop. May understood that kind of silence. It was the language of healing. One evening, as she walked home with her marigolds tucked into a paper bag, she thought of her sister. Not with anger, not anymore. Just with distance. Like looking at a painting of a place you once visited and no longer needed to return to. That night, May sat at her desk and wrote her first letter. Not to her sister. Not yet. But to herself. Dear May, she began. You are not what they left behind. You are what kept moving. She sealed the envelope, even though she had no plans to mail it. Just writing it was enough. The act of naming your own worth is an act of power. And as she drifted to sleep, her heart carried a quiet truth. This wasn't a recovery. This was a rebirth. She wasn't just building a new life. She was remembering how to live. 3 weeks passed before May even noticed the time. There was no countdown, no calendar circled with obligations. Just days that folded into each other like warm sheets, soft, ordinary, clean. She worked the flower shop in the mornings, organized inventory on quiet afternoons, and sometimes walked home with Tobias if their shifts ended at the same hour. He never asked too many questions. He didn't pry. And that, in its own quiet way, was a gift. They talked about plants mostly and weather and the kind of silence that comes with age, not the awkward kind, but the kind that says, we've both lived through storms and we don't need to name every cloud. There's a particular comfort in finding someone whose grief matches your pace. One Monday morning, Ruth handed May the mail as she came in. Most of it was junk, catalogs for garden tools and postcards from local events. But one envelope stood out. No return address. Just her name. Her full name, handwritten in that careful, looping script only kids use when they want to make sure they're taken seriously. May didn't open it right away. She placed it under the counter while she trimmed daffodils. She made small talk with a customer looking for forget-me-nots. She swept the floor twice. But the letter waited. When the shop emptied for lunch, she sat by the tiny break room table, hands steady but heart trembling. She opened the envelope. Inside, one sheet of lined paper. Folded twice. Dear Aunt May, where are you? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you disappeared after the diner. That you went missing. But I don't think you're missing. I think you finally had enough. I don't blame you. I miss you.
Kieran.
It was from her nephew. The boy who used to crawl into her lap at family dinners. The one who always asked for help on his school essays. Not because he needed it, but because he wanted to sit next to her. The only one who had ever seen her as more than just the reliable relative in the background. May read the letter twice. Then a third time. She didn't cry. She just felt her chest loosen, like someone had unclenched a fist around her ribs. That night, she walked to her room with heavier steps. Not tired, just full. A kind of fullness that only comes from being remembered. And not for what you do, but for who you are. The next morning, Tobias was already at the cafe near the shop. He raised his coffee cup when he saw her, like a flag of friendship. She sat down, not saying much at first. Just wrapped her hands around the mug and breathed in the scent of strong roast and warm bread. He didn't ask what was wrong. Instead, he said, some people think grief is about losing people. But sometimes, it's about realizing you were never seen by them in the first place. May nodded. He wrote me, she whispered. Your nephew? Yes. Good. They didn't say more. They didn't need to. Later that week, May stood at the post office with a blank envelope in her hand. She didn't write a return address. She didn't include her last name. Just to Kieran and the phone number he had scribbled in the corner of the letter. Inside, she placed a note. Just a few lines. I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm somewhere quiet. I miss you, too.
Aunt May.
She hesitated before sealing it, as if she could stuff more of herself into the creases. But that was enough for now. It didn't need to be a full story. It just needed to be a light, a flicker in the dark that told him she hadn't disappeared, not really. After the letter was sent, she found herself feeling lighter. Like she had passed a torch without burning her fingers. The following week, Tobias brought her a plant. A small potted aloe vera in a cracked ceramic pot. "You look like someone who could use something that heals," he said. She smiled. "You're not wrong." They sat in the back of the shop, arranging new displays for spring. Tobias told her about his son, the one who moved to Arizona and rarely called. Not because he didn't care, Tobias said, but because he didn't know how to show it. "You think that's true?" May asked. "I think men like me and women like you, we raised generations that didn't have to see us struggle. So they assume we never did." She thought about Linda, about Jenna, about all the times she said yes when she wanted to say, "I'm tired." All the meals made, the rides given, the birthdays remembered even when hers was forgotten. Maybe Tobias was right. Maybe they had made it look too easy. That night, she sat by the window with her aloe plant and her journal. She wrote the word forgiveness in large capital letters, then underlined it, then stared at it for a long time. It didn't come easily, but it didn't feel impossible anymore either. She thought about the diner, the long hours, the ache in her back that day, and how much harder it would have been if Kieran hadn't written. That letter, short and sweet, was the first seed of healing. And in that seed, May saw something beautiful, not a return to the past, but a gentle reaching forward. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about planting new things in old soil. The next morning, Ruth greeted her with a warm smile and a stack of mail. May scanned it quickly, half hoping for another letter from Kieran. But instead, there was something else. A newspaper clipping. Folded, mailed from Wilmington. On the front, "Local family seeks missing aunt." May stared at her own face, smiling beside a pie dish at a family barbecue from 10 years ago. The headline was loud. The quotes from Linda and Adam were louder. "We're very worried," one said. She vanished without a word. "We just want her safe." May didn't laugh. She didn't cry either. She folded the article gently, set it beside her journal, and whispered, "Now they miss me." But what echoed louder was the memory of Kieran's letter. Because some people only worry when they lose control. But some people, the rare ones, they remember your voice, even in silence. The newspaper article didn't make her angry. Not the way it would have a few years ago. Not even the way it might have months ago, sitting in that diner, watching the world pass without her. Back then, she might have screamed, cried, maybe even called. But now, she just felt sad. A quiet sadness, like the kind that washes over you when you realize the book you've been reading all your life was written in a language you never really understood. They didn't want her back. Not really. They wanted control. They wanted closure. They wanted to be the ones who left and still looked like victims. May folded the clipping and slid it into her dresser drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. She didn't owe anyone her presence. And then the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but her heart did. "Kieran," she said, before she even picked up. A pause. Then, "Hi, Aunt May." His voice was deeper than she remembered, but still soft in the places that mattered. She imagined him sitting on a bed somewhere, knees bouncing nervously, eyes darting like they did when he was little, and trying to confess to a broken vase. "I got your note," he said. "I figured. I hope it was okay that I called." "It's more than okay," she said. "It's good to hear you." He let out a shaky laugh. "I've been checking the mailbox every day." They didn't talk long. Just enough. Enough to say she was safe. Enough to tell him he mattered. Enough to hear, in his voice, something she hadn't felt in a long time, sincerity without obligation. At the end of the call, he didn't ask her to come back. He just said, "I'm glad you're okay." And that was enough. After they hung up, May sat by the window, watching the breeze tug gently at the wind chimes outside. She thought about all the years she'd spent giving, not because she was asked to, but because it was expected. Because being the reliable one had become her role, her costume, her armor. But now, she didn't need armor. She had peace. She had healing. And she had a voice on the other end of the line that didn't ask for anything but her truth. Later that afternoon, she told Tobias about the call. They were potting begonias out back behind the flower shop. He didn't say much, just grunted a quiet, "Good," then handed her a fresh pair of gloves. "Don't get sentimental," he added. "You'll overwater the plants." They both laughed. Not loud, not forced, just real. That night, May wrote again in her journal. This time, a full page. Not about her pain, but about her strength. About how forgiveness, when it's real, doesn't feel like giving in. It feels like letting go of the rope you were never meant to carry. She wrote, "I didn't choose to be left, but I chose what came after. And that's the part that matters." The next morning, Ruth asked if she could cover the register for the weekend shift. May agreed. She liked the rhythm of the shop, the smell of soil, the quiet joy in helping someone pick the right flower for the right apology. A woman came in late Friday afternoon, frazzled, too much makeup, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "I need something," she said, "for my mother-in-law. She's in hospice. I think I waited too long to, I don't know, say something kind." May led her to the hydrangeas. "They're for apologies," she said, "and for saying what you couldn't say before." The woman blinked back tears. "That's perfect." When she left, May felt the weight of the exchange settle gently in her chest. She wasn't just selling flowers. She was part of people's healing. And maybe that was the greatest kind of elderly wisdom, not the kind passed down in quotes, but the kind lived, quietly, through action. The following Monday, a package arrived. No return label. No note. Just a small brown box, wrapped neatly. Inside, a book. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. It had a yellow post-it stuck on the front. "Underlined a few for you."
K.
She opened it and flipped through. One page was marked with 2 lines. "I exist as I am. That is enough." She closed the book and held it to her chest. This wasn't just a gift. It was recognition. Validation. The kind she'd waited for, not from her sister, not from her brother-in-law, not even from society, but from someone who had watched her closely enough to remember she was a person, not a favor. She placed the book beside her aloe plant and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, she got up early and made lemon muffins. Tobias stopped by around 10. "You're glowing," he said, eyeing the tray. "Must be the muffins," she replied. "Must be something else," he said, sitting down beside her on the porch. They watched the birds pick through the feeder Ruth had put up across the street. It was a slow morning, but the good kind. May turned to Tobias after a long silence. "Do you ever think maybe we were never meant to give everything away?" He nodded. "I think we just didn't know we were allowed to keep some for ourselves." She smiled. "I think I'm ready to start keeping more." "Good," he said. "Start with the last muffin. I won't fight you for it." They laughed again. Another crack in the wall around her heart, letting light in. That night, May wrote Kieran a real letter. In her best handwriting. Not explaining everything. Just saying, "You were always enough. Still are. Come visit if you want, but only if it's just you." She folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in an envelope with his name on it. No return address. Just a chance. Just a door slightly open. And maybe, just maybe, someone would walk through it. May didn't tell anyone he was coming. Not Tobias. Not Ruth. Not even Joyce, the neighbor who had started dropping off leftover pasta and unsolicited advice once a week, always pretending it wasn't kindness. She didn't want to explain it. Didn't want anyone asking if she was nervous or excited or hopeful. She wasn't any of those things. She was ready. That was all. Kieran had written back, a short note, the kind that looked like it had been started and restarted a dozen times before he just let the words spill out. "I'm coming to Portland.
Just me.
No expectations. I just want to talk. I'll be at the Red Fir Motel, room 12, this Friday and Saturday. If you don't show, I'll understand." He didn't beg. He didn't guilt her. He didn't write please. And that, more than anything, made her say yes. Friday came with a silver sky and the kind of damp air that felt like it couldn't commit to being rain. May dressed slowly. Nothing fancy. Just her navy coat, her favorite soft scarf, a clean shirt, and a little lipstick, the color of dried cherries. Not for him. For her. She didn't tell Joyce where she was going. Joyce didn't ask. That was their agreement. The Red Fern Motel was just off the highway, modest, clean, tired in the way buildings get when people pass through but never stay long enough to remember the room number. She knocked once. He opened the door like he'd been waiting there for hours, hand on the knob, heart somewhere near his throat. He was taller than she remembered. Scruff on his chin. Tired shadows under his eyes. But when he looked at her, his whole face softened, like a boy seeing home. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Hi, sweetheart." He didn't hug her right away. Just stepped back and let her inside. The room smelled like takeout and motel soap. The bed was made. The desk cluttered with books. She smiled when she saw them. Paperbacks, a worn moleskine journal, a yellow pencil stuck through the spiral binding. "You brought books." He shrugged. Didn't want to assume we'd talk the whole time.
They both laughed, gently.
She sat at the small table near the window. He sat across from her. Not too close. Just enough. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said after a long pause. "I didn't either." He nodded. "I read your letter. The one you didn't send." Her eyebrows lifted. "You found it." "Mom did. I don't think she was supposed to, but she gave it to me." "I see. I'm glad you wrote it. I'm more glad you didn't send it."
"Why?"
He looked down, thumbs brushing the edge of the table. "Because it wasn't for her."
"It was for you."
May smiled. There it was, the heart of it. The why behind every letter, every quiet act of reclaiming. She hadn't needed them to understand. She had needed herself to remember. They talked for over an hour. About small things, big things.
About books.
About work. About his part-time job at a bookstore in Boston. How he lived above a bakery and sometimes woke to the smell of burnt cinnamon rolls. Sounds awful, she teased. Surprisingly comforting. He asked about Portland.
About her job.
About Joyce and Ruth and Tobias, though he didn't know their names, just the outlines of their presence in her letters. He didn't ask about coming back. And she didn't offer. Because this wasn't about going backward. This was about being seen. Near the end of the visit, he reached into his bag and handed her a small wrapped bundle. She opened it carefully. Inside, a slim book of poems. Hand-stitched binding. The kind of book someone makes, not buys. "I marked the ones that made me think of you," he said. She flipped to a dog-eared page. One line underlined in soft pencil. "There are women who rise not from fire, but from forgetting who told them they couldn't." She closed the book and looked up.
"Thank you," she said.
For the book. For everything. They didn't hug goodbye at the motel. They just stood quietly near the door, the distance between them filled with something stronger than words, trust. "I'm glad you're safe," he said. "I'm better than safe," she replied. "I'm new." He smiled. "You look it." She walked back slowly through the city. The streets were wet but quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you listen to your own footsteps.
She didn't feel drained.
She didn't feel conflicted. She felt whole. At home, Franklin the cat meowed at her, offended by her lateness. Joyce was already in the kitchen, stirring something in a dented pot. "You look smug," Joyce said, without turning around. "I might be. I approve." They ate lentil soup with too much garlic and listened to the radio. No one asked if she was going to see the rest of her family. No one needed to. Kieran had come. And he had left behind not guilt, not pressure, not expectation, but respect. The next morning, May pinned the poem to her corkboard above the desk. Next to it, a postcard she found at a thrift shop, an illustration of a birdhouse with the caption, "Home is where you remember who you are." She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The light had changed. Not the sunlight, but the way it hit her walls. Like it had been waiting for her to return. Not to them. To herself. The day after Kieran left, the sky in Portland turned soft with fog. The kind that muffled tires on pavement and made everything feel like it was wrapped in memory. May woke earlier than usual. Not because of noise, not because of routine, but because her thoughts had already started writing. Before her feet hit the floor, before the kettle sang, before Franklin had yowled for breakfast, the first line was already formed in her mind. To whom it may concern, it had been lingering for weeks now. A decision that had built itself, slowly, between flower deliveries and shared porch wine, between quiet mornings in the shop and shared glances with Tobias across tables. She was going to write a letter. Not to her sister. Not to her nephew. Not to anyone in the family. But to the lawyer. The one Adam had sent. Derek something. With his neatly pressed suit and his "we're just worried" tone, like she were a cat gone missing instead of a woman who finally walked out the front door with her name still intact. She sat at her small desk, opened her drawer, and pulled out the same thick stationery she used to use for birthdays and Christmas letters, back when she still sent those. She chose a pen that wrote smoothly, evenly, and began. To whom it may concern. There is no cause for further legal contact. She paused, then added, I am of sound mind, in a safe environment and not under duress. That word, duress, tasted like a stone in her mouth. She rolled it once before setting it down in ink. I have retained local legal counsel. Any further attempts to contact me under the guise of concern will be considered harassment. She signed it with a steady hand. Martha L. Harlow. It was the last time she would write that name on anything involving her past. That afternoon, she walked to the post office with the letter tucked into a plain envelope. No flowery return address. Just one stamp, the one with the bird on it. A finch, her favorite. The kind that sings even in the cold. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even a statement. It was a line drawn with quiet clarity. A boundary. That evening, as she stepped back into the flower shop, Ruth handed her the weekend schedule. Heather's out Saturday. You on the morning shift? Sure, May said. I like the way the shop smells before it opens. You like the silence. I've earned the silence, May said with a smile. Ruth chuckled. That you have. Later, over tea, Tobias sat beside her on the porch. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched the light move across the neighbor's fence. Then, finally, he asked, You ever think you'll go back? Just to say something? May shook her head slowly. I said what I needed to in that letter. It just wasn't the kind they'll frame for the fridge. He nodded, sipping from his chipped mug. Sometimes it's the unsent letters that change everything. Sometimes, she replied, it's the ones you send and don't wait for a reply. That night, May opened her journal to a blank page. At the top, she wrote in cursive, The rules of my second life. 1. No explanations to those who didn't listen the first time. 2. No time spent where I am only welcome in theory. 3. Flowers first. Apologies second. 4. Silence is not an invitation, it's a choice. 5. When someone sees you, let them. 6. When someone forgets you, remember yourself. She didn't finish the list that night. She didn't need to. Some lists weren't made to be complete. They were made to grow, like vines up the walls of places you build with your own hands. The next morning, Joyce peeked her head in with a flyer in hand. Community Center is doing a potluck next Friday, she said. You and I should go. May raised an eyebrow. You go to potlucks? I go to free food and other people's gossip. Don't read into it. May smirked. I'll bring my lemon squares. Good, Joyce said. I'll lie and say I made them. It was a small moment, but important. The kind of moment you don't write down but you remember anyway, not because of what was said but because of what wasn't. Nobody was asking her to explain her absence. Nobody was trying to rewrite her silence. She was part of something now, not because she was useful, not because she was needed, but because she was seen. That evening, Ruth surprised her with a gift, a nameplate for the shop counter. Not fancy, just etched wood with clean letters. M. Ellington, floral assistant and resident poet. May ran her fingers over it gently. I figured it was time people knew who's behind the hydrangeas, Ruth said. May smiled, blinking back something sharp but sweet. Thank you. She placed the sign on the counter the next morning, just beside the tip jar. A woman came in around 9 a.m., looking lost. I'm not sure what I'm looking for, she said. May gestured toward the peonies. Sometimes it helps to start with what you miss. The woman nodded, tears catching in her throat. May didn't flinch. She knew that kind of loss. That kind of searching. That kind of healing. She wrapped the flowers carefully, tied them with lavender ribbon, and added a small card that read, "Still here. Still blooming." Later that day, as she swept the front steps, Tobias passed by with a small bag in his hand. "What's that?" May asked. He held it out, a magnet hand-painted. "A birdhouse." "I saw it and thought of you," he said. "It's silly." May shook her head, smiling.
No.
"It's perfect." She placed it on her fridge beside the postcard with the same birdhouse. Because some things, the right things, find their way back in pairs. And this time, she wasn't just remembered. She was rooted. The community potluck was held in the basement of a local church that smelled faintly of pine and old hymnals, the kind of space where generations had cried, prayed, and passed Tupperware full of potato salad without saying a word. Joyce showed up at May's front door that Friday afternoon, already balancing 2 trays and a half-used roll of foil. "We're bringing both," she declared, gesturing to the covered dishes. "Your lemon squares and my barely recognizable enchiladas." May grinned.
Deal.
"But I'm putting my name on the lemon squares this time." "No need," Joyce said with a wink. "Everyone will know." They arrived 10 minutes early, just as folding tables were being covered in plastic tablecloths and someone was arranging mismatched chairs in loose rows that would later collapse under conversation. A woman with a clipboard and a long gray braid greeted them with military precision and a smile. "Names: Joyce Simmons and May Ellington," Joyce said, proudly, like she was announcing the headliners at a concert. The woman nodded. "You're early. That means you get to help direct traffic." Joyce groaned. "Should have parked later." But May didn't mind. She liked watching people arrive. The slow trickle of neighbors carrying crockpots, Tupperware, and warm aluminum trays. Each person with their own dish, their own backstory, their own quiet hope of being liked. She stood by the coffee station, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of something vaguely resembling hazelnut roast, and took it all in. The basement buzzed with soft introductions, bursts of laughter, and the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping against linoleum. May noticed how many women wore sweaters, the thick, comforting kind that spoke of age, experience, and a shared understanding that comfort mattered more than fashion. Someone tapped her shoulder. "Did you bring the lemon squares?" She turned to see a woman with kind eyes and a practical haircut, holding a paper plate. "I did," May said. The woman exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all week. "God bless you. I thought Clara Porter was bringing that cursed dump cake again. Yours smells like someone still remembers what holidays are supposed to feel like." May chuckled. "I've been known to bake under pressure." They found a table together. The woman's name was Marcia, a retired school librarian with a soft spot for trivia and an encyclopedic memory for pie crust ratios. She introduced May to Terry, a former bus driver who told stories in half sentences and wore suspenders like a badge of honor. "I haven't been to one of these in years," May admitted. "Me neither," Marcia said. "But when you stop showing up, people forget you exist." May nodded. "I did that once. I disappeared." Marcia looked at her, not with curiosity, but with recognition. "And now, I'm done disappearing." Later, during dessert, Joyce leaned over and whispered, "You look smug." "I feel smug." That lemon square tray was empty before the prayer even ended. May laughed, a deep, belly-warm kind of laugh. The kind that didn't need to be hidden behind a napkin or swallowed for someone else's comfort. It had been so long since she'd been part of something that didn't require her to prove her worth first. That evening, they walked home together in the early autumn dusk, their arms swinging, the breeze curling around their shoulders like an old song. Back at the house, Joyce kicked off her shoes and flopped onto the couch. "You know," she said between sips of boxed wine, "you've been here almost 2 months." "I know. You planning to stay?" May looked out the window. The street was empty and soft under the glow of the streetlights. Franklin the cat was already curled in his favorite chair, gently snoring. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." Joyce nodded. "Good. This house is weird without someone yelling at the cat." They toasted with lukewarm tea. The next morning, Ruth handed May an envelope. No return address, she said. But it's postmarked from here. May opened it after her shift, sitting on the back steps behind the flower shop, her apron still dusted with pollen and ribbon threads. Inside, a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, large, deliberate, like someone trying very hard to make sure they were understood. Grandma, I'm coming to Portland. I want to see you. I'm not bringing anyone. I just want to talk. I'm staying at the Redfern Motel on Maple, room 12. Friday and Saturday. If you want to come by, I'll be there. If not, I'll understand.
Kieran.
There was no guilt, no pressure. Just a boy, no, a man, reaching out with quiet hands. May folded the letter slowly. This wasn't just another visit. This was something else. Not a reunion. Not a reconciliation. But a bridge. And this time, she didn't feel like someone crossing to the other side, begging to be let in. This time, she was on solid ground. She had the choice. And that, more than anything, was enough. Friday morning arrived with a chill in the air, the kind that nudged you toward memory. May took her time getting ready, not out of hesitation, but intention. She ironed a clean shirt, tucked it into slacks that still held their shape, and buttoned her navy coat, the one that fit like something earned. She applied lipstick in the bathroom mirror, that same dried cherry shade, and laughed softly at the woman looking back at her. Not because she looked young, but because she didn't look lost. She didn't tell anyone she was going. Joyce didn't ask. That was their rhythm. The Redfern Motel looked exactly the same, tired, quiet, modest. But this time, room 12 wasn't a mystery. She knocked once. The door opened instantly. Kieran looked older than he had just weeks ago. Tired in a different way. But the moment he saw her, he stood taller. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. He stepped aside and she walked in. The room smelled like hotel soap and takeout again. But this time, it also smelled like something softer, maybe hope. The bed was made. The curtains drawn open. Books scattered on the desk, a hoodie draped over the back of the chair. You look good, he said nervously. I feel good. They sat at the table again, only this time, their elbows almost touched. There was less distance now. Fewer shadows. I wasn't sure you'd come. I know, she said. But I wanted to. He didn't speak right away. Just ran his thumb along the edge of his coffee mug. I read your letter again, he said finally. The one you left in the drawer. I keep thinking about one line. Which one? You didn't lose them. They let go. May looked out the window for a long moment. That was the part one didn't want to admit to myself. For a long time. It's not your fault, Kieran said. You gave everything. She nodded. That's what I thought too. But giving everything doesn't mean they were entitled to all of it. He didn't respond. He just looked at her with eyes that listened. Then he reached into his bag and handed her something. A book, small, thin, handbound. On the cover, To the Women Who Stayed Quiet Too Long. She turned the first page. Inside were poems. Not published ones. His. Scribbled in ink, full of awkward line breaks and bold feelings. She read a few in silence. Then one stopped her. There is a difference between leaving and being left. One is a step. The other is a scar. But both are doors. Both are choices. And both can lead to home. She looked up. His eyes were damp. I wrote that the night I got your first letter, he said. It changed something in me. You changed something in me too, she whispered. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Instead, he stood up, went to the desk, and returned with a little tin box. Inside were receipts, scraps of paper, and an old photo, faded at the edges. It was her, holding him in the garden, both of them mid-laugh. A moment long buried under years of birthdays missed and phone calls unanswered. I've always remembered this, he said, even when no one else talked about it. She touched the photo gently. I forgot how happy I looked. You were. He didn't say it to make her feel guilty. He said it because it mattered. Because that version of her, the joyful one, hadn't died. She'd just been buried beneath the weight of being everyone's afterthought. Until now. Can I ask you something? he said, voice barely above a breath. Of course. Do you forgive them? My parents.
May thought about it.
About Linda's perfectly rehearsed concern. Adam's lawyer. Lisa's polished silence. The 8 hours in the diner. The plastic water bottle. The lie that came after.
No, she said.
Not fully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Kieran nodded. Okay. But I'm not angry anymore. He looked up. That's the part one needed to hear. Why? Because I was afraid you'd carry them forever. And I want you to be free. She smiled, not sad, not bitter. Just real. That's the gift, isn't it? She said. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But freedom.
He nodded again.
It's what I want too. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't press, doesn't rush. The kind that feels like warmth wrapped in quiet. Eventually, she stood to leave. He didn't stop her, just walked her to the door. Outside, the air had shifted. The sun was lower, the wind colder. But May felt steady. He hugged her this time. Long, quiet, careful, like a boy who knew this moment didn't need words. Be good to yourself, she whispered. You too, he said. She walked home slowly. Franklin the cat greeted her with indignation. Joyce looked up from her crossword. You smell like French fries and closure, she said. May grinned. That's about right. They ate dinner quietly, soup, toast, too much butter. Then sat on the porch wrapped in old quilts, watching the sky turn lilac. Was it worth it? Joyce asked. All of it, May said. Even the hard parts. They didn't toast.
Didn't need to.
The stars blinked above them, like they were listening. And for the first time in years, May didn't feel like someone trying to get back what she'd lost. She felt like someone building what she'd never been allowed to dream of. A life that didn't ask her to explain. A home that required no permission. A self she didn't need to prove. May didn't tell anyone she was turning 75. Not because she was hiding it, but because this time, she wanted it to be hers. For decades, birthdays had been about cake she made for others, cards she bought, dinners she organized. Family showed up late or not at all. Gifts, when they came, were practical sweaters, cookbooks, candles. Nothing that said, I see you. This year, she saw herself. She bought her own cake, chocolate, rich, 3 layers, from the little French bakery down the street that wrapped everything in twine and tissue paper like it was a gift. She picked out a bottle of red wine with no idea if it was good, only that the label had wildflowers on it. She didn't clean the house.
She didn't plan a guest list.
She didn't make room for anyone but herself. Joyce, of course, barged in around 4:30. You didn't really think I'd let your vintage ass sit alone on your birthday, did you? May laughed. I didn't think you knew. I asked Ruth. Ruth knows everything. Together, they sat on the porch, wrapped in mismatched blankets, drinking wine out of chipped mugs. Franklin stalked the garden like a tiger with arthritis. I didn't want a party, May said. I just wanted peace. You've earned it. I used to think I was too late. You're right on time. They toasted quietly. To 75 years of breath and breakage and becoming. To not being needed and still being wanted. To not being anyone's second choice. Not anymore. Ruth showed up an hour later, carrying a bouquet of peonies and a bottle of honey. I didn't bring a gift, she said. Just something pretty and something sweet. Tobias came, too, in his usual cardigan and with a tiny blue envelope. Inside, a pressed flower and a card that read, You were never invisible. Just too bright for some eyes. May blinked away tears. You all are going to make me feel things. That's the point, Tobias said, patting her shoulder. You're allowed to feel things now. You're not holding anyone else up tonight. They ate cake, laughed about Joyce's complete inability to use email, and passed around memories like bowls of popcorn. And somewhere between the second glass of wine and the third retelling of Tobias falling into a rose bush on a delivery, May realized she wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a call. Not for a letter. Not for anyone to say you matter. Because she already knew. After everyone left, she cleaned up slowly. Not in a rush, not with the resentment of a hostess, but with the calm of someone who had chosen this moment. She lit a candle in the kitchen, boiled water for tea, and opened her drawer. Inside, she found the letter she wrote months ago. Dear me. She unfolded it. Reread the words she had once needed. You waited so long for someone to save you. You forgot you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let go. And you finally let go back. And look at the life that opened. Well done. Love me. She added one more sentence. You didn't rebuild. You built something new. And that's even braver. She taped it to the inside of the dresser drawer, behind old recipe cards and a photo of herself from 30 years ago, holding a pie and pretending not to be exhausted. Now, she didn't need to pretend. She turned off her phone, put the tea on the nightstand, slipped under the covers, and for the first time since she was 22, she didn't fall asleep rehearsing how to make herself smaller. She slept the way brave women sleep, soft, full, unafraid, because she was not someone who had been abandoned. She was someone who had been released, and she had walked through that open door into a life she made with her own 2 hands. If you're still watching, still here with me, then maybe this story found you at the right time. Maybe you've sat in your own version of that airport lounge. Not with a suitcase, necessarily, but with something heavier. With years. With sacrifice. With silence. Maybe someone told you they'd be right back. Maybe they never were. Maybe you've been good. Too good for too long. Reliable. Available. Predictable. And slowly, invisibly, you became background music to someone else's life. But let me tell you something I wish I had heard sooner. You are not a favor. You are not an afterthought. You are not a maybe later in someone else's itinerary. You are a full sentence. You are the first draft of a story that never needed their edits. And if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. You don't need permission to begin again. Start small if you must. Boil water just for yourself. Wear lipstick just because. Buy the coat that makes you feel sharp, even if no one sees you wear it. Let your phone stay quiet if it brings you peace. Let your voice speak louder if it brings you home. And if you're afraid, that's okay. Courage doesn't feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like standing in a thrift store, holding a magnet shaped like a birdhouse and thinking, maybe I belong again. Sometimes it feels like refusing to send the angry letter and sending the honest one instead. Sometimes it feels like baking your own cake and putting your name on it. You're not too late. You're right on time. And the life that's waiting for you? It doesn't require an invitation. It only requires that you show up. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's daughter. Not as someone's convenience. But as yourself. You, exactly as you are. Wrinkled, weathered, wise. So here's what I'll say, in case you need to hear it again. You are not someone they forgot. You are someone they underestimated. But you rose anyway. And look at you now. If you do choose to step out of that metaphorical airport lounge or the real one, come back and tell me. I'll be here, on a porch somewhere, sipping tea, wearing a coat that fits, listening to the birds, not waiting but welcoming. And when you arrive, we won't need fanfare. We'll just smile. Because the greatest stories in this world are the ones that begin quietly, with one woman remembering that she matters, with one voice, maybe yours, saying, I'm still here. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting for someone else to see your worth and start living like you already know it. May's journey wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering herself, choosing peace over permission, and building a new life out of pieces others tried to discard. The truth is, you are never too old to begin again. Whether you're 55 or 75, your story still matters. You don't need anyone's approval to matter. You just need your own quiet courage and one small step in your own direction. Because healing doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it comes with a new key, a warm coat, and a nameplate that finally says you belong here. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you've watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll always receive new stories as soon as they're released. We appreciate you. You're never too late to choose yourself.